So there's only been a few times when I've started with a seed for a sermon and it just didn't take root. I usually have time during the week to till the ground a bit and see what starts to grow in between the multifaceted business of leading a small church. I love that phenomena of when you're thinking of something in the back of your mind and then all of a sudden images and ideas connected to that idea emerge all around. It's like when you're looking for a place to rent and all of a sudden all you see are for rent signs, where before you may not have noticed them. Honestly, just thinking about the process of writing a sermon during the week brings me joy. For me, writing sermons and creating worship is a part of my spiritual growth and understanding. And it's a way that I'm able to bring my voice into this congregation as we move through times in the life of this church and in the broader world together. But this week, it didn't happen. I mean, this week was a stinker when it came to digging into the topic at hand. The seed for this week was a catchy acronym I discovered in the back of David Breeden's book called After the Bloody Mary Game, Living into Humanism. David is the senior minister at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis, just down the street from our congregation. Those darn WWJD initials have caught my attention since I saw them first and people started wearing them on those rubber band bracelets. Since then, I've seen people replace that "what would Jesus do" with other initials like WWDD for "what would Dorothy do," or WWPD for "what would Picard do." All of these series of initials create acronyms to get us to stop and consider a new way of thinking or being or doing. They can potentially open us up to new possibilities that might not come without someone giving us a nudge. So although I read about ancient Cynic and Stoic Greek philosophers, and I read awesome excerpts from Curtis Reese and John Dietrich, two very famous humanists, I recognized that I couldn't get into the depth of where I wanted to go and to be able to grasp the concepts and meaning enough to be able to speak of it with any credibility or certainty this morning. And my brain, which I imagine feels somewhat like maybe some of yours, has fallen into a bit of a fog. I chalk it up to COVID and too much time on Zoom, juggling too many things in my life, and the stress of not knowing how long this COVID risk will be high, and concern over when and how we might gather indoors again. So after sitting in front of my computer for over an hour and a half, and after having researched all this stuff, I kept hitting a dead end in my heart and my mind and my spirit. And so I gave up. I threw in the towel. I took a deep breath. I highlighted the awkward paragraphs I had already created with way too many excerpts of Breeden included. And I pressed delete. And I decided to change course, to travel away from the headiness I was caught in, and instead to enter into the wisdom of my heart. So instead of talking about the call of the cosmos, which is a little daunting, I must say, I decided to return to the topic of the Serenity Prayer, a pragmatic prayer which has been a bedrock of my inner life for decades. Those of you who watch the monthly calendar may be aware that we have this group called Third Thursdays at Michael Servetus Unitarian Society. It's an intentional group for people around 60 and older. This is the third time I've created such a group in congregations. The larger congregations I served, it wouldn't be uncommon to get 20 to 30 people on Thursdays. Folks would gather to have a chance to listen and learn and reflect and be heard. We don't get quite the same crowd at MSUS, but I so miss setting up the tables in the social hall. I'd set up the chairs and I'd put silverware and napkins in each place with glasses, and sometimes I'd go outside and pick flowers to put in the center of the table. For me, this ritual was done in the spirit of hospitality, of literally laying the table so we could gather and be in each other's company. Those who come and have come at other churches seem glad to having meaningful midday gathering when it's light outside and the building is quiet. I always tend to stick to a consistent format, an opening reading with a chalice lighting, some brief introductions with a guided question, some reflections on the topic of the day. In the larger churches, we would break into small triads, but at MSUS, we stay together, gathered in chairs over by the couches. Initially, each person shares mostly without interruptions. It's a gift that we can give each other when in other parts of our lives, time to speak may be disturbed or not distributed equally. After an hour, we pull out our potluck items and we sit around the table for a shared meal. When we gathered, there was always laughter and joy and care and openness and curiosity and gratitude and sometimes new connections. If you're finding in this time of COVID that you feel alone during lunchtimes, I really encourage you to log on to Zoom. I hate to say it, but we do have a group there who gathers every day and finds those connections and joy and humor. It's a nice way to break up our days. So I remember one time at White Bear, a week before the gathering, I snatched up an uneaten fortune cookie from our kitchen counter, and the small paper said, "Listen to the wisdom of the old." When I think of wisdom, two things come to mind: the Serenity Prayer and elders in my life. So I took this as a sign to bring the Serenity Prayer to the group. I opened our gathering that day with a discussion of the Serenity Prayer from the original Christian theistic point of view. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. As you may hear, having heard a sermon about prayer not that long ago, it opens with this petition, and they ask for God and for God's counsel and companionship. In this version, God is central in one's discernment of what we are called to do next and can be trusted with that which we need to let go of or feel powerless over. But then, mindful of the humanist and atheist among us, I spoke of the text simply starting with, "Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change." So who or what these words might be directed to didn't really matter. They could be directed towards ourselves, reminding us to get out of our own way, to open up space, to turn down the volume or turn off the tapes of self-doubt, self-righteousness, anger, judgment, grief, you name it. Many of us have libraries of dusty old tapes and newer ones that clutter our minds and hearts. The words "grant me the serenity" could also be directed to some undefined greater mystery or the universe or a higher power, something that is not me or you. It may be a greater spirit of love and wisdom that can hold larger questions, that can help us get to that calm, that pause, instead of triggering emotions. It might quiet unimaginable doubt and anxiety, or interrupt the desire to step into the center of things and try to contain an uncontrollable situation. In many of our small groups gatherings at MSUS, we often do the practice of hearing or reading and then sharing what stood out or what caught your attention. That day, I gave the Third Thursday group members a handout that included both versions of the prayer. And then I gave them an assignment to reflect on the prayer as a whole, or to concentrate just on one or two lines and to sit silently and write for 5 minutes before they started to share their thoughts. I should remember this more often. It's not a bad exercise for introverts. And so once the 5 minutes of the individual writing was over, the room was just this buzz of nonstop talking, which was often the case in that group. And when the group returned and reflected in the larger circles, there was a range of places that this prayer took them. There were 3 retired educators who ended up in one group, and their previous work necessitated the need to create personal centering techniques in the hectic moments and hours and days of classroom teaching. One spoke of imagining her body inside impermeable glass. Another would envision blowing the emotion out of the top of her head. And the third had this imaginary super garbage can nearby where he would deposit that which was getting in his way of being present. They knew that as teachers, they needed to find their own serenity in challenging situations. Many of us have found similar techniques to be more effective parents, adult children, professional partners, or friends. Another group brought forth the topic of estrangement that is just so common in families. As aging people with estranged family members, how does one hold out hope in the midst of separation and despair? Or does one have no choice but to accept what is? Can we do both at the same time? Outside families, estrangement from friends or others in our lives can also create grief and confusion that makes it hard to get to that place of serenity. In a time of rapidly changing technology, many find this online communication can muddy already troubled water, leaving out important clues like body language and the opportunity for clarification in a personal conversation. One person reflected, I find myself interpreting the question, does it matter or not? For instance, when there's a lack of response to messages, I can feel this sense of irritation and sometimes interpret it that the person doesn't care, that they're angry or they're troubled, and it increases my anxiety. The person continued, does this call for serenity or acceptance? I ask myself if I should just let it go, or I should check it out and clear up the uncertainty. The person grappled with this question of, does it matter or not? Could I be misinterpreting this? What is me and what is not me? One person wrote wisely, I start with acceptance and noticing what is, not judgment, planning, doing, or fixing. This is calming to know my responsibility is to start with being in the situation, whatever it is, and just letting it be, just letting it be. After this, which can be 5 minutes a day or week or longer, I can, with increased calm awareness, decide if there's something I can do, that I should do, or that I want or am able to do. Sometimes doing is not an active behavior, but just continued presence with and in the situation. That person said, I can give myself permission to do nothing. Another woman in the group described this as a perpetual dance where you listen, ask good questions, and pulled back. Serenity is an inside job. Sometimes it requires that little square breathing technique that we just tried. It's something we must seek and intentionally work towards. Spiritual practices can help us enter into a calm, clear, and centering place. Some find exercise, time in nature, or rich conversation can have a similar effect. Sometimes when chaos strikes me, I hear that hymn, voice still and small, and those words and rhythms have a way of soothing my soul and planting whatever I am feeling into a longer human continuum of fears and tears and pain and sorrow. In the hymn, the voice remains singing. The words gently urge me on. There will always be things great and small that we cannot change. 12-step programs remind us that we are powerless over people and places and things. I hate that. The program points its participants to focus on oneself, taking stock of our own attitudes and emotionals and belief systems that keep us locked in roles and behaviors and responses that simply don't work. I'm aware that some of this language can feel passive to those unfamiliar with 12-step programs, and the reality is that through such simple yet challenging clarity, those in recovery have reclaimed a life of meaning and self-worth. They've been held in deep love, which impacts all who they encounter and creates people who can contribute to the greater good through service. That second line of the Serenity Prayer, accept the things I cannot change, is something that is hard to remember. There's a poem called Allow by Dana Faulds, which reminds me of that truth. Dana says, there is no controlling life. Try corralling a lightning bolt containing a tornado, dam a stream, and it will create a new channel. Resist the tide and it will sweep you off your feet. Allow and grace will carry you to higher ground. The only safety lies in letting it all in, the wild with the weak, fear, fantasies, failures, and success. When loss rips the doors off the heart, or sadness veils your vision with despair, practice becomes simply bearing the truth. In the choir, to let go of your known way of being, the whole world is revealed to your new eyes. I love her inclusion of the workings of natural and daily world metaphors for our very human experiences. Most of us have lived through such experiences of being swept up in something that felt as powerful as a tornado, or feeling the doors of our heart ripped out by grief and sadness. She reminds us, resist the tide and you will be swept off your feet. Allow, and grace will carry you to a higher ground. Our choice is to deny or to accept, to resist or to allow. Two reflections from that group at White Bear were good examples of how to live into acceptance. One recently retired teacher said, "I'm working on trying to go with the flow," as they say. Meditation every morning is important in the big scheme of things. I don't feel like I have the energy to change things. I do what I feel like is important for my well-being. Wisdom in my life is knowing I can accept what is going on. And another elder reflected on how during her small group discussions, the stories of others provided wisdom. The person said, "It opened me up to what I have to do. It came to me like a bolt of lightning. I can change how I look at it. It's so simple." I had found this article from Yale University that says, the formula of the Serenity Prayer is not intellectually sophisticated, but it clearly has had a profound influence in the lives of many. It's an easily memorized 25-word prayer that is a tool to help discern truths from lies, illusions from fantasies, illusions from reality, and fantasy from facts. If we take it to heart, we will grow to trust our own intuition and be less emotionally impulsive, the article said. It said that Bill W., one of the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous founders, is quoted as writing, "Never have we seen so much AA in so few words." For alcoholics of his time, this marks the early years of their acknowledgement of alcoholism as a disease, which should be as free from judgment and shame as any other disease. The prayer is one tool which helps people maintain healthy recovery, make honest amends to those they have harmed, and continue to take a rigorous moral inventory of their thoughts and actions. Pretty powerful stuff for a 25-word prayer. Many of us, I think, just don't necessarily feel equipped with the trust and wisdom needed to navigate choices we have to make. The most challenging occasions for this prayer come when we encounter unmanaged mental illness, addiction, and untimely death. And I've spent hours with a dear friend who recently whose sibling recently attempted suicide. This time, it was more serious than the last, and there's no way to know what the next few days, weeks, and months may look like. And when I mentioned that I had switched my sermon to the Serenity Prayer, she said emphatically, "Oh, I am praying that all the time." Praying, deep breathing, seeking serenity amidst uncertainty and pain. Repeating this prayer can help one move into acceptance, even if it is coupled with reluctance and grief. It can remind us that self-care and leaning into one's faith is crucial in times of great stress. And sometimes it is literally all you can do as you await an outcome. Those who live with estrangement and loved ones with mental illness and addiction may seek the wisdom to determine how to love and let go at the same time. If helping is your default, loving and letting go is not easy. Several members of that White Bear UU Third Thursday group spoke of having careers in helping activities. Their work in retirement was to learn to step back and to let circumstances unfold, to learn to listen without forcing answers or easy fixes. They spoke of learning how to back off and to pay attention to when pushing their own agendas felt wrong. I love one of the reflections that I was given after the discussion. The person wrote, "Grant me the ability to stay open to others' stories and the knowledge to form my own." And another stated, "Change. I can't really change much except me, and even that is difficult. Acceptance, as I grow older, I'm becoming better accepting things and people as they are, so I guess I am actually changing myself. Wisdom. It seems to be inside, and I'm better at trusting that as well. So I guess I am changing." This prayer, this practical prayer, gives us an invitation to pause, to take stock, to check things out, to be less reactive and more aware of how we are in relationship. This can be done in the silence of your own prayer, in meditation, in journaling, and walking, in breathing. This faith community offers many intentional groups where truthful and searching conversations can change the course of one's thought and actions and beliefs. Perhaps you found such nourishing, non-judgmental souls in your personal life or your family beyond church as well. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Weber wrote a book for his young sons following his terminal cancer diagnosis. He wanted to pass on what he had learned in his life, and he wrote, "So then what? That's my question about getting angry or phased. The answer for me, through most of my adult life, has been just a few adapted lines from the Serenity Prayer that I desperately try to practice. Accept the things I cannot change, change the things I can, and seek out information and perspective from others," which he called wisdom, "so I can tell the difference between the two. Seek within, seek with others, stay open to wisdom from any source." Thank goodness we do continue to change. We find sources of wisdom along the way and seek meaningful ways of living in our lives. We can't stop the suffering in our lives, in the people we love, or in the world. This is something we must accept. Pema Chodra, an American Tibetan Buddhist, reminds us that things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and fall apart. Then they come together and they fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Letting there be room for not knowing is the most important thing of all. We try to do what we think is going to help, but we don't know. We'll never know if we're going to fall flat or sit up tall. When there's a big disappointment, we don't know if that's the end of the story. It may just be the beginning of a big adventure. This prayer, let it be an invitation into not knowing, into deep listening, into pause, into being honest about what is yours and what is not. Let this prayer be a gift to re-examine our need to fix others or to control situations. Let it guide us to be more present, to be more careful listeners, and able to love amidst great uncertainty. Greater acceptance may just bring new truths into your life and invite you into an unexpected adventure of growth and honesty. It takes work to step away from fear and judgment in order to move into greater integrity. With such care and faith and intention, we can all be instruments for a greater peace in our lives and in the world. May it be so, and amen. We have perhaps a few minutes for some conversation. I don't know if folks have relied on the Serenity Prayer or this idea of letting go in order to remain, actually, I think remain connected in relationship, to remain sane and grounded. So I'm wondering if anybody has anything they'd like to share about their own experience in relation to the Serenity Prayer, or that idea of taking a pause and taking stock. Katie, are you looking?
I see Janice Sancock.
Janice.
I really liked inspirational quotes and sayings for many, many years. And I tend to keep one on my computer desktop so that I'm inspired. And in 2019, it shows a fall setting with sunflowers and orange balloons. And it says, one of the happiest moments ever is when you find the courage to let go of what you can't change. And I had that on my desktop for a long, long time, more than just 2019. But I really do think it has a certain amount of more implications beyond just the simple sentence. Because one of the happiest moments ever is when I found the courage to let go of what I can't change.
Mm-hmm. Janice, that's a beautiful, if you have that image, send it to me and I'll put it in the news from the office near the link to the sermon. That's beautiful.
Okay, thank you.
Darn wisdom just in like one line. Holy moly. It's kind of counterintuitive, I think, but at least for me it was, because I was definitely a believer that if I got into it, I could make things better. Mel says, I am reminded of a quote, "Attention is prayer" by Simone Weil in terms of acceptance. That's beautiful.
I'll raise my hand and call on myself briefly. The Serenity Prayer has not been a touch point for me, but I like that quote, or the thing from Pema Chodron and other ideas of kind of going around, that things fall apart and come together and fall apart and come. It's the cyclical nature of things can help me to understand that I'm not necessarily going to get through something and never come back to it again.
Yeah.
I get very annoyed, or I can get very annoyed by like, oh, this again, and
Yeah.
to understand that there is a cyclical nature and hope that it's not exactly the same as it was the last time through.
Yes. Yeah, you can kind of, and it does seem like for many of us, we seem to get presented with the same lesson throughout our lifetime. And, you know, I do believe there is change, though. It returns and we are slightly different than we were when we encountered it before. Thank you, Katie. I think we will. Oh, I see Marie's hand. You can do it, Marie.
Yeah, I had to get something out of the way.
Okay.
Yesterday, we were coming home from actually my grandson's 14th birthday party. And there's something that happened just for me. And on the way home, I was thinking about it and just getting really upset. And I realized, my God, this is really old stuff. And I guess this goes more with relationship and connecting. So I asked Bruce, what do you think about this? And he said his thing. And it felt really nice, but yet I wanted to say, no, you know, you don't mean that. And I'm going to say, no, that would be putting him down and really not listening. And so then I didn't talk the rest of the way home, the last couple miles. And I don't know, we got in the house and I just like, thank you. I mean, because he was there for me. So connecting with people is really important.
Wow. And Marie, I just want to say, like, that idea of you had sort of emotion stirring, but you just stayed in the silence versus reacting back to, like, I mean, I just think there is something about, I was listening to some Mr. Rogers videos this morning, don't ask me why, and he was talking about silence and how we don't have enough silence in our lives and how that impacts our relationships. So the thought that you just sort of let it be and were able to move in that place of gratitude by the time you walked in the door. What a great story. Thank you. All right, I think we will move on unless anybody else has their hand up, Katie. Good. All right. Our closing hymn is going to be 318 in the gray hymnal. It's "We Will Be One," and this music is provided by the Community Church of Chapel Hill.